Ministry of Defence, we kind of work. Thank you. We do work basically as a layer below DIO. So we facilitate training across the UK on all the sites that the Ministry of Defence own, and there are quite a lot of them. So I can just get rid of that. So obviously the Armed Forces of the UK covers everything from the Air Force to the RAF to the Army to the Navy as well. So we cover all of these sites across the country, and as I say, it is a support. So we kind of cover all the areas that are required on the ranges that basically Armed Forces aren't interested in. Really, it's a facilitation for them to do their training. So the wider team that I belong to with DIO really includes ecologists, planners, foresters, public rights of way people, listing building experts, and those archaeologists as well. And this really is just to ensure that we have a fully functioning military training estate. As you can see, I mean, there's so many vehicles and men running about on these areas that they do have to be looked after, and this is basically what our job is. So as a background, the defence estate itself, this picture here on the right hand side, I don't know if you can see the pointer here, all the little yellow, well, pink blobs that you can see, they are actually areas that are owned by the MOD. So you can see there's quite a lot. It's not a great picture, I'm afraid, but you can see, there's some of these larger training areas up here. Obviously, Kirkcudbright is down in this area down here. We have places like Otterburn, and we have Salisbury Plain down at the bottom down here as well, and various other bits and pieces that is just owned by the MOD. The MOD does actually own 1.8% of the country, so it's one of the biggest landowners in the country. And on that land, there's 858 listed buildings, and I checked, there is. There are 771 scheduled monuments. There's over 10,000 archaeological monuments that are nationally important but aren't protected by law, like scheduled monuments. There's 10 World Heritage Sites, 6 registered battlefields, and 4 archaeologists and 3 building experts to cover the entire lot. So, as you would expect, we are stretched pretty thin. But, we basically cover large areas. So, for example, in our team, in the archaeology team, myself and my work share, I work part-time, and my work share works part-time. He's been in semi-retirement for about 5 years now, and I've been trying to push him out of the job for as long as I've known him. He won't go. He's talking about leaving next year, so I've maybe become a full-time member of the team. But we both work, we actually cover what is euphemistically called the North and Scotland. So that is literally everything from Lincolnshire up to Cape Wrath. My boss, he covers Salisbury Plain, which is a job in itself, and then our colleague Guy, who is down the south, he covers what we call South and Wales. And obviously I don't need to describe where the South and Wales are for you. So we do cover large areas, but we advise all the different rangers and all the different training safety officers and the various armed forces that train on those areas. So kind of real, just to give you a little bit of background, I probably don't really need to do this given that you're a historical society, but it's a nice prompt for people who don't know about it. Scheduled monuments and listed buildings. I hope you don't mind as well. This is going to be about 50 slides of really tight text like this, yeah? Nah, it's not really, just lots of photos, don't worry. So this is just really to give you a background of what scheduled monuments and listed buildings are, if you don't know. They are selected as a sample and protected by law through close management by the landowners, so in our case it's the MOD, so they can be handed down to the generations that are coming. And it's the same with listed buildings. They're recognised for architectural merit, and this doesn't just mean merit that is beautiful, it also means things that are unique in the country. So for example, Chatsworth House is a listed building. The ancient testing beds at Spade Adam from the 1960s Cold War are also a listed building. It's not about beauty, it's about where they stand in British history. And this is, and again, they are protected by law from destruction, demolition, or changes. And this is overseen by English Heritage in England, obviously, Historic Environment Scotland, up here, obviously, in Scotland, and then CADU. And we, as archaeologists and the listed buildings team, we have a very close working relationship with these three statutory bodies. So we know a lot of the inspectors that work for these particular bodies, and we work well with them if anything needs to be done. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do on the ranges later on in the talk with Historic Environment Scotland. So essentially, what does an archaeologist for DIO do? In the first case, we protect the built estate. So this is, some of these areas are scheduled, some of these areas are listed. So again, we work very closely with our listed building colleagues. You can see here on the right-hand side, you'll recognise this, I'm sure, Fort George up here in Scotland. And also we've got Portsmouth Docks down in the south, and it's an incredibly historical area. There's a lot of listed buildings to do with the Navy, with the development of the Navy. So this is, quite an important area that we have to look after. But we also as well look after the rural estates. And these are some of the barrows that you can see here on the right-hand side there. These are on Salisbury Plain. You see how good some of this archaeology is. I'm going to talk about why that is as well later on. But this is the kind of thing that my boss, Richard, looks after in his day-to-day life. And also here on the left-hand side is Otterburn training range. And this is the one that just stretches just between England and Scotland. So it's just on the border in Northumberland. Salisbury Plain is the largest training area in Europe, but it's broken down into smaller areas. Otterburn is the largest single training area in Europe. So these are huge, huge areas. And when you're out on these places, like when you're out on Otterburn, you can go for an entire day without seeing another person. They're so big and they're so remote. Otterburn itself has quite a lot of Roman remains. There is the Roman, I think it's Deer Street that goes straight through the centre of it, coming up from York, up towards Hadrian's Wall. And interestingly as well, there's a few of these little things you can just see in the fall of the ground here. This is a forward observation base, which was built as training for Afghanistan, but it looks very much like a Roman marching camp. It's like the traditions of military history have kind of not really changed a great deal in 2,000 years. And there are Roman marching camps all over Otterburn. And also, the MOD doesn't own land in the UK. We also hire, we rent and also hire land and own land across the world as well. So we also protect the overseas estates. So for example, this is out in Kenya. This is Batuk, British area training in Kenya. My colleague Guy looks after this. He's been out there. This is Akrotiri in Cyprus, RAF Akrotiri. My colleague Phil, he looks after this. However, he will be handing it over to me next week. So I've come up from Rotherham today, but I'll be out to Cyprus next week for a handover. And then we also have Belize as well. And surprise, surprise, my boss looks after this. You know what I mean? If you're going to pick, you may as well pick. I have yet to actually go out to some of the further afield areas, apart from next week when we go to Cyprus. But I have been promised the Falkland Islands. So everybody else gets these lovely places, and I get the drafty South Atlantic. But this is, again, we're here to talk really more about Kirkcudbright, but I just wanted to share this photograph really just to show you before we kind of get into some of the stuff on Kirkcudbright. And this is just some of the heritage assets that are dotted across the land, the defence estate itself. So we've got cup and ring marks here. These are at Feldham in Catterick on the training areas up there. We're going to talk a little bit more about those ones at Kirkcudbright, but these are some really nice examples, and there's quite a lot of these. These are scheduled monuments at Catterick. So again, these are part of our protection. We have down here, this is on Salisbury Plain. You can see here, these are medieval, not furrows, but these are platforms for fields. And these are still in really good condition, as you can see here. And again, this is all scheduled monuments. And then at the top here, this is up at Marne Barracks. And these are Spitfire dispersal pens. So these were built in the Second World War when there was a threat to airfield bombing to split up the aircraft and protect them as individual assets on their own, so they wouldn't get bombed together. And these are a scheduled monument. And when I started the job, one of my first jobs just before Christmas on the first year was to help clear the scrub off one of these as part of our management program, and I was kind of pinching myself thinking, this has got to be the best show in the world. And 5 years later, I still think exactly the same thing. I think it's fantastic. But here we are at Kirkcudbright, and I'm sure you all know Kirkcudbright, and everybody is relatively familiar, at least, with the training area. This is taken from our mapping that we use in the MOD, which shows the areas that we own across the MOD. So you can see this is the actual training area superimposed onto a modern map here. So this is the size of it, basically. I'm sure, again, given the audience, you probably all know this area, and you probably know these little lumps of land. So I'm not going to I'm not going to try to describe exactly whereabouts it is. But the site itself, I mean, it's still a relatively well-preserved medieval landscape. And this is a fantastic photograph just for showing that. Although there is the impact of modern military on the landscape, a lot of the MOD lands were actually bought up during the Second World War and previous to that as well in the First World War. So they've actually helped, by buying them, they've actually helped protect the archaeological assets that are on those sites. And you can see here, this is a really nice photo of Kirkcudbright itself. You've got the tank, the reinforced tank road coming through the centre here, but you've also got here as well, really well-defined ridge and furrow marks from the medieval period, and these just haven't been touched. We do have tenant farmers on the land, but it's mainly cattle and sheep. So there's no ploughing on the land. So these archaeological remains are pretty well intact, and we have some of the best formed archaeological remains in the country on the MOD ranges. Okay, as I say, we'll do a bit of a whistle-stop tour really through some of the actual the remains and the history of the site, or at least some of the things that you can see. And here's a couple of some maps that I was able to source, and this is the prehistoric landscape of the training area. You can see here. So we've got a couple of these maps out. We've got some forts. I'm going to come back to these later on. So a couple of forts here. We also have some homesteads and hut circles. You can see these scattered quite across, and also rock art as well. The cup and ring rock art that I mentioned before, and I'll show you some examples of that in a second. But as I say, the prehistoric landscape of Kirkcudbright is still fairly intact because of the fact that it has been bought up as a training area and is almost preserved in aspic really at this point, because there's very little development across the area, apart from the occasional road and things going in like that. And again, we have some really spectacular cup and ring marks across the training area. Most of these have been mapped. I know there was somebody recently at one of the conservation meetings, I say recently, a few years ago, pre-COVID now, who had done quite a lot of work. And I'm sorry, I've completely forgotten his name. It's gone out of my head, but he had mapped all the cup and ring marks across the area. But these are just some of the examples of them. You can see here. These are probably Bronze Age in date. We're not entirely sure. The jury is still out on these things. What they're for, again, we kind of really don't know. It's just it's a bit of an enigmatic prehistoric cultural thing that seems to be happening that we're not entirely, we just can't work it out in our modern times. But they stretch all over the place, and they're generally in good grazing land. They're generally quite high above sea level. They seem to be marking something, but just what we don't know. I think probably one of the best ways to describe them is if somebody from the prehistoric period came to now and saw traffic lights with no concept whatsoever of roads or cars. Their misunderstanding or lack of understanding of those is the same kind of thing that we have of these. I mean, are they to mark where good pasture is, or is it to mark territorial boundaries? We just don't really know. And again, we say that they're Bronze Age because we found Bronze Age artifacts in association with these kind of things. And these are some really good examples at Kirkcudbright. These are nationally important, but they are not protected. They're not protected by law, but they are protected by the local county council archaeologists. So if any works were to occur, we would then as archaeologists, we would then advise those doing those works, where not to dig, basically. I spent a couple of wet days up here when they were putting in some cabling across the range, making sure that they weren't going to hit any of these couple of ring marks, and they didn't, so that was good. But they're really intricate designs and they're really lovely, but just what they are, no idea. So answers on a postcard, really. But as I say, some of these things have been mapped, they have been recorded over the years. We do know, we know their locations, at least, if we don't know what they were for. And these are, again, protected, at least at a regional level, if nothing else. And we look after them as a heritage asset on the ranges as well. So we make sure that tanks aren't running over them. And here as well is another Iron Age hut circle, a little bit later than the Bronze Age. This is south of Wall Hill, if anybody knows where that is. Now, you're probably looking at that going, well, there's not much there, is there, really? But the Eye of Faith does say there's a tiny hut circle in here. And I believe me, it's there. You just can't see it very well. But, once it's pointed out, it kind of stands up. But again, it just really shows you the breadth of the type of site that you're going to find on the training ranges. And again, this is not just Kirkcudbright, this is all across those training ranges. All of the sites that we work on have these kind of prehistoric landscapes and historical landscapes as well. Okay, one of the other things as well over on Kirkcudbright is the farmsteads. A lot of these are medieval, some are later though, of course. The land at Kirkcudbright was bought up in 1942 as part of Operation Bolero, which was the buying up of various training ranges across the UK as part of the build-up towards the D-Day landings or the Normandy landings. And Kirkcudbright was one of 4 training ranges that was bought up. Warcock was another one, and I've completely forgotten what the other 2 were, but they were down south, so they don't count. But Warcock was brought up as part of that, and these farmsteads were the ones that people were living and working on prior to that. And you can see there's a good scatter of these across. So we have, the country houses and other buildings and things, and these squares of small farmsteads. So there's quite a nice scatter of these across the entire area, really. The War Department bought up the land. So as I say, this has basically helped preserve this landscape as a snapshot. Deep ploughing that is now used for farming didn't come into being really until the 1950s. So this is why the archaeological landscape is still in good condition. And outside of the wire and outside of the MOD land, it's been pretty much demolished by deep ploughing and also by urban expansion. We just don't have that. But that said, it still is a finite and a disappearing asset as well. It's a resource that, as archaeologists and as historians, that it's something that, is not going to be around forever. And this is an example. This is Mullock Farmstead. You can see here the map regression of it goes back to the 1850s. This is the OS maps of the 1850s and 1894. The buildings are there. 1946, it's still there, but by 1962, it's pretty much collapsed in on itself. And then this is a modern photograph of it. This is what's happening to these buildings as they are disappearing. And this is, as I say, a resource that we are losing all the time. So these are things that we have to be aware of as the archaeology advisors, that these things are there to be not so much preserved in this case, but at least recorded, so we know that we have them and they did exist. And just to add the layers really to the rest of the knowledge of the site, the historical knowledge. And this includes buildings like this, Balmain House, an extensive country house. This is how it looked before 1942, before the areas were bought up. And you can see here, this is the back of it. And this is the map of it. It gives you a good idea of how big the actual area of Balmain is. Some of the features of the building still stand. There's a wall, a garden wall, for example. There's a little pond down there. However, in the 1960s, the Royal Artillery decided to use it as a target. So it no longer exists. Now, we have changed and we don't do that kind of thing anymore. But unfortunately, like I say, these things, you know, some of these things do get lost. And this, unfortunately, Balmain House is one of those unfortunates in this case. But I guess, as you would expect, you know, this is a military training area. It's a military training range. It's an active one now. It is still being used for tanks. It was actually brought up originally for tank use in 1942, and this is what the first training was. And this, again, map just shows you some of the military usage of the site, and obviously, you know, there's a lot more of it. But this is historical stuff. So we've got firing positions here. We've also got targets as well. These are hard targets. Tank targets for exactly. We've got track roads, tracked targets as well in orange here. Various tank roads cutting across the site itself as well. A lot of these are still being used. Some of them are out of use because it's older technology that has just moved on, of course. But again, it just gives you an idea. It's just another layer on top of everything else. So we've got prehistoric all through the medieval, all the way through to the industrial age, and then now the modern stuff as well, all kind of interacting together. And again, all part of that story of the site itself, you know, just basically the layers of an onion, really, just stripping off historically. And it was already mentioned that I have a passing interest in military history. So some of these things are some of my favourite parts of the ranges. Things like this, we have a dummy tank target. You can see here. There's a picture of one here, a plan of one here. But this is one of the actual ones on the range itself. This has been a 1940s kind of range, or a target, or later. Not very well damaged though, is it? So they're probably not being very good at whoever's firing at it. But we also have other hard targets as well, which were actual vehicles. So for example, we've got the Comet tank here on the left-hand side. You can see there's a couple of other hard targets as well, which again have all been recorded and their use of. And we have this here, the tank target rail track. Again, not used now, but still part of that historical makeup of the range itself, because obviously it's a military range. And we also have as well my favourite. Now, I'm sure you all know what this is. No? It's an A39 Tortoise. Now you all know what it was, don't you? Actually, this is quite an important tank, to be honest. It's a prototype. There was only two made in 1946. It was a late war British tank, heavy tank, that was supposed to be introduced to the fighting towards the end of the war. But obviously the war ended. And there was only two of these made. There's this one here at Kirkcudbright, and there's one down at Bovington Tank Museum, and that's it. They're the only ones. We did offer at the Bovington Tank Museum several years ago if they wanted to take this for spare parts, but they said no, they've got enough. So she sits up here on the ranges in all her glory. I always go and pay attention to go and have a visit to the tortoise whenever I'm up here. I love this tank. But sticking with tanks, I've got quite an interest in tanks, I've got to tell you. These are some fantastic photos that were sent over to me by the official historian of the Royal Hussars. He sent these pictures, and these are actually Polish troops training in 1944, we think, at Kirkcudbright, as part of the build-up and the training for Operation Overlord, the invasion of France. Well, not the invasion, I suppose, the D-Day landings. And the reason I called the talk Turning Jam to Tanks is because when the land in 1942 was actually bought up by the War Department, it was almost harvest time, and there was a lot of turnips that were actually being grown as part of harvest. So the first task they had to undertake as a War Department was to harvest the turnips. And they had so many turnips they didn't actually know what to do with them. So they actually started turning them into jam and selling them in the local community. So it's a nice little thing off the back of the buying up of the area. As I say, there was a wholesale buying up of 4 plots of land across the country. I do have it written down actually, so I can remember where they are now. So it was Minehead, Warcock, Aldborough, and Kirkcudbright. So these are the areas that were all bought up together as part of Operation Bolero. And the first units that to move into the area and train were the Polish 1st Armoured Corps, and that's these guys here training in Honey Stewart tanks, which is the British version, I think, of the M3 American tank. And this is the Polish Army Reconnaissance Regiment, because these are only small reconnaissance vehicles. But you can see the kind of conditions they're working in. This particular photograph here on the right-hand side, I haven't tried to do it, but I'm fairly sure you could probably pinpoint that area down quite easily. There's quite a lot in that landscape that you could probably at least, find exactly pretty much where these guys are. But these photographs are just such nice ones, and as I said, I like to show them because they were sent over to me specifically by the historian of the Hussars, and he very kindly shared them with me for a sanctuary article. We write articles for the Sanctuary magazine, which you can get online. It's an MOD produced magazine once a year. If you just search online for Sanctuary magazine, you'll find it. And these were in the D-Day special that I wrote an article about Kirkcudbright that you can go and find. But they're just fantastic pictures. A lot of people thought that Kirkcudbright was actually bought specifically for the Polish armour brigades, but it wasn't. It was bought up by the British War Department. It's just so that the Polish armour brigades were looking for a home at the time, and they were the first units to start to train there. Other units also trained when the Polish guys moved out of the area as well. So quite a lot of different people coming and working on these sites as well, not just the Poles. Okay, we'll go a little bit back further in history here now. We'll start to look at some of the actual scheduled monuments that are on Kirkcudbright training range, and there's 4 of them. So we've got Glenap, which is prehistoric fort, Barracks, I think I'm saying that correctly. Doon Hill, another prehistoric fort at Barracks. Kirkcudbright Lock, I can never say that one out loud, but you can read it. Prehistoric fort, and then Dunrod, the homestead moat, village and church site. And just to go back to what I was talking about with the scheduled monuments, these are all protected by law, and these are all ones that are housed or located within the MOD wire at Kirkcudbright itself. And the first one here is Glenap Fort. You can make it out here. There's some ramparts at the top there, wooded area around the top, and it kind of slopes off a little bit towards the back end. I'll just read out the Canmore description for this. This is taken from Canmore, the website that lists Scottish historical monuments. And it says the remains of a hill fort on a wooded hillock besides a stream measuring approximately 81 meters by 50 meters in size, and the ramparts survive better in the north, though an entrance to the southwest is still visible. So that's where the trees are here. At the top is the northern ramparts of this fort. Prehistoric wall, we don't really know how old it is because as far as I'm aware, it hasn't been excavated in modern times, so we've not really got the data, but we figure it's prehistoric. And you can see, I mentioned how big the ramparts are. You can see here, this is a 1 meter pole, so 3 yards in old money, but you can see how large these ramparts are there as it goes up the side of that photograph. And these go all the way around. And it is quite difficult to walk up and down this. This is a pretty steep old hill. But this is one of the projects that I've been currently working on. And one of the things that we do as the archaeology advisors is each year we have to find projects across the training range. Generally, it's things like scrub removal or mitigating any kind of damage that occurs to any of these scheduled monuments from training or from any other aspects. And then we put in bids into what are called the CSF, which is the Conservation Stewardship Fund. And then these bids are all they're collated by our bosses, and then they decide which ones go forward. Generally, the archaeology ones go forward because we're quite cheap, so we don't spend a lot of money, but we do quite a lot of work with the money we get. And as I say, a lot of these things are like scrub removal, so we'll be doing that kind of stuff here at Kirkcudbright, for example. But one of the projects that I've been doing this year and concentrating a lot on is this one really is at Glenap, is the badger damage. There is a family of badgers that are living in the fort, and they have far more protection than archaeology ever does. as my ecology colleagues always like to tell me. But yeah, they certainly do. I mean, you can't move badgers. Well, you can move them, but you have to jump through quite a lot of hoops and things. And this is what we've been doing. So we're trying to relocate these badgers from where they live at the moment. You put up badger gates. Basically, there's like one-way gates. When they come out, they can't get back in again. And then once the area, the set is clear of badgers, we get ecologists to come in and check. Once it's clear of badgers, we are then able to put down wire meshing. The badgers will go off and find somewhere else to dig into. And then the protections on the fort are relatively complete until the badgers go around the other side and start digging in from there. But I don't want to think about that. But this is like a typical CSF project, and this is, like I said, this is the main one that I'm currently doing at the moment over at Kirkcudbright. So these are things that are fresh at the moment, and things that we're working on all the time. We also have Doon Hill as well. This one again, just to read out the description from Camhor. This says the fort is circular in plan. This is another fort. It's circular in plan, measures 56 meters northeast to southwest by 50 meters traversely. The defences consist of 2 ramparts and a medieval flat-bottom ditch, which you can see here around the top of it. The inner rampart is now reduced to a scarp, while the other survives in the north, south, and west. Although the northwest corner has been damaged by a later quarry pit. The east of the monument has been removed by the construction, right there, of a tank firing position and associated hard standing. Now, this was done in the 60s, so don't blame me. But it is because scheduled monuments only really became protected by law in the 70s. The actual hard standing of the tank platform is also part of the scheduling, because it is still part of the history of the site. And in 1,000 years, it's still going to be part of that history of the site. It's going to, we're looking at it with modern eyes, but we're thinking about it in future terms as well. I always like to joke as well that this road up to the top of the hill fort is quite steep. So whenever we're walking down it, I do like to say it's very well named, because you are actually going Doon Hill. So that's my Scottish joke for the night. But you can see here, this is the tank firing platform. So this is concrete. And as I said, this is also part of the monument now. So it is part of its history, and we have to protect it. There were, I think, a lot of telegraph poles were piled up here by probably somebody who should have known better, but they were moved away as part of our project, to get these things off site, to ensure that these things are retained in the state that they are. And we also have 5-yearly or 4-yearly surveys done of the scheduled monuments across the MOD estates. We farm this out to other companies, and they come along. These photographs are taken from their reports. They report back to us, and they tell us, because obviously there's only 4 of us to cover the entire country, we can't do everything. But they report back and they tell us the state of the ground, basically, of these monuments. And then we work off the back of that for the CSF projects that we then undertake for the rest of the year. And I also mentioned it as well. This is on Doon Hill. This is on the scarp. This is on part of the battlements itself. And this is, again, at risk from animal burrows. These are rabbits this time. But this, again, is part of those ongoing CSF funded projects. These are things that we have to keep the rabbits in check, and we have to look after them, because obviously, they do become a bit of a tank killer, and we don't want that happening, do we? But yeah, so it's just another aspect of the kind of work that we're doing, and emphasising the fact that we do it as well at Kirkcudbright. So it may not look like it from the outside, but we are quite busy up here doing things. And this one's Craigracht Loch. This is another fort once again. Not a great photograph of it here, but this is the only one I had, I'm afraid. But this is a subcircular fort of about 50 meters internal diameter on the spur of Wall Hill. And the ramparts are not clearly visible, as you can see from the photograph, but are present to the north and to a lesser extent to the south of the fort. However, there is also military installations as well built into these forts. And this is here. This is an observation bunker that you can see. So again, this is part of the scheduled protection of the site. This was built obviously pre-1970s, and is just part of that history of the site itself. But you can see how the fort itself rises up. And once again, these are the three prehistoric forts of the training area. Just to emphasise, we really don't know the ages of them. It would be nice to be able to put in a project to actually do some dating on these. You could probably quite easily put in some small test pits and get some kind of either charcoal dating or carbon-14 dating or either OSL kind of dating out of these things. But that might be something for the future, you never know. And also one of the more spectacular, I suppose, or nice looking of these sites is this one. This is Doon Hill. This is the Homestead Moat, and it also has a village and a church site as well attached. Although a while ago we actually sold this area off. This is a little graveyard and church as well, but we actually sold this off. So we, when I say we, the MOD, we own everything apart from this little patch here. So this is no longer under my protection. But you know, we kind of pay it a bit of attention, you know, whilst we're doing other works elsewhere. Just to say as well, this one, Doon Hill, is a deserted medieval village as well. It's got a later building and Doon Hill's church, and the church, as I say, is outside the MOD ownership. But the Homestead Moat comprises of a rectangular platform, which is bounded by a fragmentary stony bank, probably the remains of a robbed wall, and also a substantial ditch, which you can see here in this square here. And there's no visible remains of the church, of the village, but we do have the medieval farmland still quite obvious here as well. As you can see, the ridge and furrow marks around the outside of the farmstead itself. So again, a really nicely captured medieval landscape, really. That is under no threat apart from really from animals, and something that again that we look after. Just to give you a view of it really across there from the church side, this is the view of the moated farmstead, and you can see the very clear outlines here of the moat itself, and it still, you know, catches water. So it is quite obvious. You've got the ridge and furrow in front of us here, the front of the photograph. And then back in 2008, it was actually subject to a survey. This is before my time, so this is my colleague Phil. They got AOC Archaeology to come out and do some work here in 2008, and you can see them here working away, doing their geophysical survey. And these are some of the results of them. I managed to find the report in our files. So you can see here, it's just emphasizing really the archaeological features of the remains. This would have been a resistivity survey or a magnetometry survey. They measure different things below the ground to see if there's any kind of disturbance or any features that we can't see on the ground as well. Nowadays, some of this stuff is being subject to LiDAR surveys, which is really good because it strips away the foliage. It's shot from the air, and you can get a really good 3D image of the ground without having to even get on the ground. It's lovely stuff, but this is the old way of doing it, 2008. And again, their results here just show you the archaeology. They've interpreted this as this is the archaeology in the centre. We've got other bits and pieces around the outside of it as well, and other bits and pieces just across this. So, you know, these are again parts of our management plans. So we get this work done so we can see if erosion or modern climate change really is affecting these kind of these monuments as well, and how we can mitigate now those kind of problems. And really, once again, really to go back to those to the animals. And although we don't do any deep ploughing, we do have animals on sites, and we generally, you know, the farmers, the tenant farmers that are across the areas keep sheep and cattle and things like that. But unfortunately, occasionally they do cause damage, and this is a little bit of damage that some of them have done down at Doon Hill. This is quite a while ago now. This was caused by sheep, but we mitigated it by literally just moving the feeder away from the area. So this was within the scheduled area. So we moved the feeder away, and by now it's lessened the impact on the monument itself, and it's also allowed that ground to re-solidify as well. So, you know, even just simple things like that, just shifting something, just allows us to keep these monuments in a pretty good condition. And, you know, we might not be perfect, but we are doing a lot better than we used to do. Like here in the 1940s, when they were training with these universal carriers on the prehistoric Ring of Brodgar up in Orkney. You know, I'm going to say we're not perfect, but we're pretty good, I think. And I hope I've put that across, at least, if nothing else. You know, things like this, we don't do it anymore, and that is something that I guess, you know, is we have to keep pushing forward just to retain the archaeological integrity of the training ranges. So with that, I will say thank you very much, and if there are any questions.